Anything you would call out, Megan, about the voting thing?
No, I think you did a good job of explaining the process. And it's my job to help work with all of you too. If there are changes, we can talk about them and make sure you're comfortable with those two. So Christina will bring, and Lori will bring the motion in January. And then I take that to the board of directors. And then I will get a front of general membership with what the final product is.
Was everybody at the March meeting this past year? Was anybody not at the March meeting? You guys weren't? Have you been to one? You haven't been to a March one. Have you been to one before? Okay. Will we have votes in our November meeting this year, do you know, on anything? Okay. So considerations. So really making sure that our members are familiar. You don't want to walk into a vote blind. I've done it before when I was previously on project development, and the conversation can quickly spin out of control. So you want to really understand what are people's concerns so that you can address them and potentially change what your motion is, or change what the project is going to be focused on, or be able to rebuttal it really in a way that makes sense and they feel heard as well. Because the conversation can quickly spin out of control when you have that many people in a room and you have one person who's really heated that gets up in front of the audience. And additional socialization is sometimes required. So also thinking about our sustainers. You know, it's really important to also bring our sustainers into this process because they can be huge advocates for us. They were last year when it came to our pilot projects, and there was a big question. We were challenged a lot last year to say, why can't these just be standalone projects? Well, could you imagine being on Homes or Right to Thrive today, knowing that you needed to execute something in September for when the students were back in school? It's a lot of pressure, a lot of time. Can it be done? Absolutely. It has been done with projects, but those chairs nearly lose their mind and the committee members with them. Our sustainers have seen both sides of that coin, and were really strong advocates for us when we said, we really think we need to incubate it, we want to take our time, we want to be really thoughtful, and make sure that we've asked all of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Okay, next slide. Questions? Did anything surprise anyone? Were you like, oh, I didn't know that we did that, or I didn't know that's what that process was, or?
I didn't really know the voting process stuff.
It's amazing that it starts like in January.
Yeah,
so like
it feels so
soon. It's
like crap.
I know.
That is something to keep in mind as you're developing these two, because it allows easier for people to vote if we can talk about something tangible that happens.
Yeah. Well, the only thing that I'd also call out is, so we obviously bring it to CMB in January. Does that mean that we're going to bring it to CMB with a bow on top and say, okay, we're done for the year? No. But we need to feel like we're in a really good spot at that point in time to make some recommendations, and then we go back to refining, and we'll continue to refine. And it's a constant evolution. This journey isn't done once project development has made a recommendation.
Yeah, just so you know, all projects come to vote every year in March. So all projects in January are in front of CMB, so it's a constant flow. But this year, these two will probably have the greatest conversation.
Well, so I had a question. So I'm sure, like for Homes or Right to Drive, we'll do some kind of pilot, something, probably not full thing, but is that before the January time frame?
That would be an ideal situation. So some of the things that we've talked about is Gems and Guides, which is one of our main partners for Homes. They have their fairs 4 times a year. Mm-hmm. So for example, maybe at their first fair in the fall, we're going and just purely volunteering so that the committee can get familiar with the layout of the setting. And then maybe it's, hey, we're gonna go and we're gonna just set up a table, and quite frankly, we're gonna see what questions come our way. It's not about having that fully baked thing, but it's about getting that exposure and feeling like we can really confidently speak to how are parents going to respond to this, how are the logistics going to work of this, what are the obstacles that we need to continue to figure out. So then when we bring it to a vote, maybe it's in the spring where we actually have had more of an opportunity to bake through it and say, okay, now we're going to try something that we really had time to think about in one of their spring fairs.
Okay.
So we really have 3 opportunities to get to those audiences, and we should think about just how do we continue to build each time versus being panicked about that first one.
Okay.
And same with Right to Thrive. Like you'll hear me talking a little bit about do with, not for. So we've talked about bringing some of the Step Up alumni or even current Step Up students together, having breakfast with them, getting to know them. You know, what is important to these girls? What do they, you know, how did they think their internship went? What do they wish they knew beforehand? So those are all examples of how we start piloting that mentoring program, and doing it in a safe way where we're putting our toes in the water instead of jumping into the deep end.
Is that all girls that we work with?
So Step Up isn't, but we have made a decision to focus on girls, just knowing that things can sometimes get a little uncomfortable when you're working with a 17-year-old boy and you're a young female. We want to avoid that situation. Okay. Particularly, have you seen high school boys? They're huge. They don't look like high schoolers. Okay, so the next piece that I want to walk through is just research. So again, giving you some context of how does a project work, and then focusing on what is it that we're going to be doing for the first half of this year, and a lot of that is going to be this research. So I gave a couple of different examples. So primary is really about hearing it directly from that person. So sitting down with the Step Up interns and having them share what's important, what do I want to learn would be a primary source, versus secondary source would be like reading the article that we saw today. So it's through the lens of another individual. I think it's really important to have both. And I will tell you, I was in project development in 2007, and we almost exclusively focused on secondary, and that was really hard because when you get those tough questions from other members, and they're legitimate questions, I don't say that to minimize the fact that they are asking those tough questions, they're asking the right questions. We couldn't speak from the lens of those people that we actually were wanting to serve. And as a result, some of those projects we brought forward at that point in time are struggling a little bit because we didn't hear exactly what is important from those particular audiences that we wanted to work with. So let's walk to the next slide here. And we're going to do a little exercise as well. So primary. Some of you may have called on behalf of the Junior League, whether it was for fundraising, whether it was for a project, but I put down some questions. This has historically always been a question on this committee of, well, what do I say to people when I call them? Quite frankly, I don't have a script, and so instead of me sitting at home writing a script for you, I thought this would be a good opportunity for you to practice and think about these things. If I'm calling another Junior League, so say I'm calling the Junior League of St. Paul, what types of questions would I ask? Who would I want to contact? How am I going to close it? How do I end the conversation? What if the conversation goes really badly? And you're like, nope, never going to work with this community partner. Well, you're representing the Junior League. You don't want to commit, but you also don't want to leave on bad terms. And what does that look like? So let's take, I'll give you like 7 to 10 minutes here, and with whoever's next to you, talk about some of these things. Love to see you do a little role play with each other. I'm not going to force anybody to do that, and then we'll bring it back together. Sound good? Cool.